Recorded Friday, January 23rd, 2026. The information discussed on this podcast is for general educational purposes only and is not legal advice. Listening does not create an attorney-client relationship.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here for another episode of the New Jersey Criminal Podcast. We have a returning guest, Mr. Derek DeCosmo, an excellent immigration attorney here in New Jersey. And it just seemed appropriate, given current events, to bring him back on and talk about, what's been going on in the immigration world. Derek, why don't you just, I don't think you need to make too much of an introduction. Why don't you just, for anyone who hasn't met you before, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and let's get right into it.
Sure. So I've been practicing immigration law for over 20 years. I come at it from kind of a three-headed approach in that I was a deputy chief of staff for a congressman at one point in my life. I teach criminal immigration law at Rutgers Law School for the last 10 years. So I lawyer, but I also feel like I'm, well up on policy in the academic universe of immigration. So that's my background.
Gotcha. So I guess take it from here. Like, what to you, like, what's the biggest thing in immigration law right now? I mean, obviously there's lots of things to choose from, but like what is the most impactful to your practice right now?
Well, I mean, I really can't narrow it down because this is such a comprehensive and systemic kind of attack on both the legal immigration process and the illegal immigration process, and obviously both of them affect me greatly. I think that what my greatest concern is the things that really go to a person's core, which is, whether it's being detained, going to jail, and getting deported, right? So I would cast that as the most serious because that's the most serious consequence. And you and I have discussed this before, and you know this well. As a defense attorney, most of the time, a client, if they have an immigration issue, cares more about the immigration result than whether or not they're going to go to prison on a criminal case. It's always, will I have an opportunity to remain in the United States? So what we're seeing really in terms of the legal immigration, that has been decreased. Estimates are between 30 and 60%. That has been done through three main vehicles. One is the administration listed 70 countries where they're just halting visa processing. Mm-hmm. Why? I don't know. I really don't, because these cases are vetted. They are approved. Like, there's never been an easy time in immigration, or immigration benefits were never handed out like candy. It's always been the most difficult arena to succeed in your case with, always. And I've been involved in it intimately for almost 25 years now. So there's that kind of false narrative, like, oh wow, there's been some kind of a floodgate, so now we have to just stop everything. Now, I will say, perception can become reality, and I mentioned this on a prior podcast and in other interviews that I've done. Unfortunately, through some misguided programs of the Biden administration, we took basically what was pretty much a static, undocumented population of about 11 million people and pretty much doubled that in about 3.5 years. And
Right.
That created a lot of chaos and a lot of concern, some rightly so, but other things I think are being exaggerated a bit, and I'll give some of those examples. The halting of visa processing when these cases are fully vetted and the last step is just to have the interview, that keeps families from being reunited.
Yeah.
Just, I don't think it matches what our values are as a country in terms of our security, our notions of family, and our economic interest. So I think that was kind of foolish, but that's been put on hold. So that impacts legal immigration.
Follow up on that. Like, are they halting all types of visa applications or only certain ones?
Well, they've classified it as immigrant visas, and what an immigrant visa means is essentially when getting your green card. So some people get their permanent resident, or colloquially green card, either at a local immigration office by being processed domestically in the United States, or some are processed abroad. And when it's abroad, it's called an immigrant visa, but what essentially it is you're going to come to the United States on an immigrant visa, and then you'll be issued your resident card within a few weeks after that.
Does that include like visas for, for example, like a spouse to come over?
Yeah, spouse, parent, children, sibling.
And they're halting them based on specific countries.
Yeah, there's a list of 70. And again, I think that the statement as to why that's necessary is spurious at best. I mean, all these people have been through process, and they've paid for these processes as well. Not just paying me as an attorney to do it, but the government requires, and Trump has massively increased all the immigration filing fees, massively. So these people are paying for this service that is just, being halted without really any reason.
What was the price increase?
In some cases, some applications went from being $200 to $2,000.
Okay.
So, we're talking about, and if you have multiple family members, there could be multiple applications. So, it's serious money. And I'm not saying that some of these fees get adjusted, but they really increased them quite a bit. So they halted the immigrant visa processing for a number of countries. And then the other thing they did in the fall, kind of behind the scenes, was that they are going through every asylum and refugee grant under the Biden administration to see if there's some reason. They're basically re-adjudicating them. Now, there's a lot of legal problems with that from my perspective.
They, as in the
Homeland Security
administration, is doing that, right?
Yes, they're bringing people back in and they're re-interviewing them. And, they have really stacked the deck with people who are members of the Department of Homeland Security now, who join under this, rallying cry of join the deportation force. So, I don't know how much the law on asylum and refugee law is going to be appropriately applied in these reevaluation of cases. And also, too, if somebody comes to the United States and they're a political asylee, they've been granted that refugee or asylee status. After 1 year, they're allowed to apply for their permanent residence, which pretty much all of them do, which that also, just built within our current system, is another time when the government will vet them. We'll run their background checks. We'll see if there's any criminal or terrorist type relationship. So they've essentially stopped these people, and I think the number is about 230,000. It's stopping them dead in their tracks from becoming full permanent residents, and is going to reevaluate whether or not they got asylum status in the first properly in the first part. And that leads us to places like Minnesota. So it's, I'm a fair dealer, right? There was large amounts of fraud by the Somali community in COVID money, like that happened. Okay. But we're now using that as a pretext to put, a full-on paramilitary force in certain cities, and are also now reviewing everybody's refugee cases to see if they should properly keep them or have them revoked. So it's extremely expensive for the taxpayer. It grinds everything to a halt, and it's largely not necessary, because if somebody is engaging in illegal activity in the United States, there are plenty of other checkpoints that they're going to hit. Okay, if I'm a refugee, at some point I got to become a permanent resident. They have to fully evaluate me then. And if I'm a permanent resident and want to become a citizen, I'm reevaluated at that point. Every time, if I'm not a U.S. citizen and come into this country or not a U.S. passport, they're running you again. So we have a system of checks and vetting. So this notion that there's no vetting isn't right. Now, again, there is a kernel of truth in some of it, because the tremendous number of people that were brought in by President Biden, either through catch and release on the southern border or a parole program that was specific to 4 countries, and quite frankly not necessary from my perspective. It was a specific parole program for people from Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, and Haiti, where they didn't really have to have any vested interest in the United States. You could just have anybody fill out a piece of paper. So that pool of people is potentially not fully vetted, sure. But the scope of the enforcement actions that we're seeing now go well beyond, well beyond people that have been in the country three or 4 years or less. Again, as I mentioned off air as we were preparing for this, I represent somebody with 44 years in the country whose son has a contract with an NHL hockey team. He's got no criminal convictions, and he's sitting in a jail cell, and I can't get him out because the other thing that the administration did this year was that they functionally eliminated bail for immigrants. So what they said is that in a court ruling, the Board of Immigration Appeals, which they are the body that sits above all the immigration judges, but they are not real judges. They are hired and fired at the will of whatever administration sits
So
in power.
they're chosen by the Trump administration.
Yes,
And appointed there.
and historically, some presidents have meddled a lot with who's a member of the Board of Immigration Appeals or who an immigration judge is, and some have been more hands off, and it just kind of like, hey, that person's not doing anything to get fired.
So
But
they make decisions that
are
affect all
binding.
the immigration courts,
Correct.
which
So they,
essentially carves the judiciary out of that process.
yeah, it does, and I'm going to kind of walk through exactly how. But the Trump administration handpicked everybody that's on the Board of Immigration Appeals. So pretty much every day they're issuing precedential binding opinions that are binding on all the immigration judges in the United States and binding on all the many millions of cases that are on the immigration court dockets throughout the United States. They are issuing precedential decisions that are systematically doing two things: systematically limiting who could potentially be eligible for a political asylum in the United States, and also limiting people's ability to be released from custody while they pursue an immigration benefit from an immigration judge. And what that does is it really stresses people to a point where a lot of times they're just going to give up on their case and ask the judge to order them deported, right? So I have clients right now, a lot of clients, even if they've been in New Jersey for 30 years, they're ending up in this tent detention center on Fort Bliss, kind of in New Mexico and Texas and the El Paso area, and it's tense. And 3 people have died there in the last 40 days. And a lot of my clients, I'm like, hey, can you hang in there? We still get to, even though the judge is going to let you out, you can still submit your application. We can still present our final case. And they're just like, I can't do it. I'm in a tent in the desert in terrible conditions. I can't stay in here for what could be a year or two, because if I win, the government's just going to appeal, and during that appeal time, while that's pending, the person sits in jail.
Do the decisions from the immigration board, do they get appealed up to the Supreme Court?
So the pathway is this: immigration judge makes a decision, they're an administrative law judge. Board of Immigration Appeals makes a decision binding on all immigration judge. They're also, administrative law judges. You can then appeal a case out into the Third Circuit Court of Appeals for us, or any Circuit Court of Appeals, and potentially to this U.S. Supreme Court. But the problem is that the law hasn't been manipulated to the extent that it's being manipulated now, and the history of decisions from those courts shows a lot of deference to agency interpretation. Even though the fundamental case, Chevron, is been overturned, which, for those of you who don't know, it's an old Supreme Court case. It said, it's giving deference to government agency decisions under the belief that they are more expert in whatever area, whether it's a Veterans Affairs issue, whether it's an immigration issue, et cetera. That's been overturned, but the precedent for all of that within the circuit courts is still pretty good. So you get a lot of deference and scope. The Supreme Court has severely limited the scope of review for the various circuit courts of appeals. So if your issue is factual and equity based, which a lot of them are, you really can't get that reviewed. As much as I want to say this judge is evil for keeping a man who's been 44 years in this country with no convictions, a U.S. citizen wife, 2 U.S. citizen kids, eligible for his green card right now, that's a deplorable person, that judge is a deplorable decision. I can't go to a real court to get that reviewed because that is not a question of law. That's a question of fact.
Yeah. So you're kind of you're stuck with that ruling.
Yeah. Well, so what we've been doing is we have been, because the Trump administration through this Board of Immigration Appeals has said that pretty much most immigrants are not eligible to even ask for bail, and that upends decades and decades and decades of practice and legal interpretation, just on the whim of this little appellate body that was handpicked by Pam Bondi. And, so we've been able to file habeas petitions in the U.S. federal district courts, real judge, real order. But as I was mentioning to you, kind of in preparation for this, the Khalil case came out of the U.S. Third Circuit Court of Appeals last week, which we're still trying to grapple with how that impacts pending habeas cases. And I'll just give a brief rundown of Khalil. Khalil was the student activist at Cornell, made a lot of news. The government alleged that he's a permanent resident of the United States, a U.S. citizen wife. The government alleged that in his pro-Palestinian activism on the campus, that he was aiding and abetting terrorists. So they sought to revoke his permanent resident card, and they have placed him in the process of deportation. A federal court ruled that he was entitled to be out of custody while these proceedings went on.
Uh-huh.
And the government, essentially challenged that. Now, he is not in custody today as we speak. And the Third Circuit ruled essentially that, hey, you have to go through the administrative process before you come to us. And that's a problem for reasons I've just stated. If I have an immigration judge who's not going to really give me a fair hearing, because the legal standard for whether somebody should get out of jail is danger to the community and flight risk, period. Now, the difference between your context and mine, when you're a criminal defense attorney, the government has to show that the person's not a flight risk or a danger to the community, or is, in the context of immigration, I carry the burden, so I have to prove to the satisfaction of the judge that my client isn't a flight risk or a danger to the community. So, you're going to get denials like we're getting all the time. Then you have to go to this appeal board.
Those denials, just so I understand it a little bit better, like when you go to those, like the immigration judges initially, and you're asking for release, the different decisions that have been made by the immigration panel that have impacted and limited when bail can be issued, like what are some things that they've done that's limited that ability to get bail? Is it attacking the standard of review? Is it saying like, all right, well, this type of case here, you can't get bail, period?
So that's a great question. So how they did it was to say that if somebody is entered the United States without a visa, what we call without inspection, they're saying that entire class of individuals is no longer eligible for bail because they've never been admitted to the United States in the first instance, which is a new interpretation of that law. They've also said that individuals who were paroled in, which I mentioned, the Biden parole program and other parole programs that we've had in the United States for years and years, decades and decades, that counts as an admission for a person's ability to get a permanent resident card. But they will then say that makes you still an arriving alien, and the immigration judge has no discretion over bail. So as it stands right now, the only individuals who are eligible to even ask for bail are people that have come into the United States on a physical visa and either overstayed it, let it lapse, whatever the case may be. But then to deal with those folks, they're having this, ridiculous test, in my opinion, and I have and will say to any of the judges doing it, because the judges are just worried about getting fired, so they're going to want to keep their jobs, of people that are, they're calling people flight risks or dangers that are just not. And that is just factual, okay? Because nobody can tell me that a man with 44 years in this country who's going to his appointment for immigration because he's eligible to get his green card right now, is now going to go run away and be a flight risk and has no convictions. So
Who the immigration judges? You said, how are they picked and retained onto the bench? Like, does like because I am is it different from the regular district judges and the circuit court judges?
yeah. So essentially, because these are administrative jobs, so they will, and obviously there's always a need for them. So like any government job, USA Jobs will post, we have immigration judge openings, and they'll be tell you what locations throughout the country. And the requirement is, that you obviously are a licensed practicing attorney with at least 7 years of specialized experience in the area of immigration law. But what happens as then a practical, and then so then you become a judge, but it's probationary for a period before you get tenure. So what you have happen is, and look, Obama did this too. Oh, who did George W. Bush appoint? All right, fire them. And then Trump comes in.
Yeah.
Who did Biden appoint? Who did Obama appoint? Fire them. So you get some of that. It's gotten more political in the last in the last few decades, but it's very hyper political now because when there is a president who is supposedly pro immigration, they're picking as many former government, if not more former government DHS prosecutors for judge jobs. They're not just picking liberal attorney activists and making them judges. There has always generally been a balance of political beliefs in the immigration judiciary, but now it's hyper political, and it makes it very, very difficult for someone like me, because if I'm looking at each week 3 or 4 new presidential decisions,
Yeah.
makes it very, for cases that take a very long time. Detained cases can be a few months to a year or whatever. Non-detained cases, because there's so many people detained right now, they're taking close to 7 to 10 years. So every time there's a change, I have to sit and explain to a client how it affects them, and then it gets changed again, and I get and it makes it really hard to prepare and plan a case. And the most recent thing that they're doing, which started in December, which is very troublesome, is that they're saying that if you are from a Spanish-speaking country south of Mexico, so that would be your Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, etc., Nicaragua, Venezuela, whatever the case may be, that they can that the government can move the judges to what they call pre-termit any application for relief, and the judges are doing that. So somebody has a valid. I have several of them. Some of them are very much real. People that were protesting President Maduro in Venezuela, who President Trump thought bad enough to send Delta Force in to snatch this guy. They're saying, well, no, you can't pursue your asylum here because we have signed agreements, and these agreements, it's very murky, but essentially there's agreements between the United States now and individual countries where they can essentially say, well, we're going to send you to Uganda. But I'm not from Uganda. I'm from El Salvador. Doesn't matter. Or you're from Venezuela. Well, we're not going to send you to Venezuela, but we'll send you to El Salvador. So they've made these agreements. And the problem with that, and look, I am not, and me on a personal level, I am a moderate person. I mean, the issues of immigration, tend to kind of, they've shifted with parties over the years, but I'm not some partisan type of person. But what I will say is this. To say that there's these private agreements and that your application is just automatically dismissed with no hearing, and now I'm ordering you deported, to me that flies right in the face of the Geneva Convention, of which the United States is an original signer, which set out post-World War II who is a refugee, which the definition of a refugee is synonymous with the definition of an asylee. So I have grave concerns about the legality of some of these actions, but while these things make their way through courts in various ways, real people are getting detained, real people are in jail cells, real people are getting deported.
I mean, it sounds like to even have it reviewed outside of the administrative side of like the immigration judges and the board of immigration, review, that you have to go through that whole process before you can even then bring it outside of that into a circuit court who, little certainly more independent because the judges there, are appointed by the Senate and presidential nomination, but then they can't be just like replaced and fired, right? So to get to that point, it sounds like it could take years, during which you would be detained in a facility from which you could leave if you just say, I want to be deported and I give up. So, how many cases are just disappearing just because they don't, the process is just, it can't be overcome. There's not the person doesn't want to sit waiting, during that time.
I mean, the craziest thing for me, you're absolutely right about that. And the craziest thing for me is, clients with the weakest cases, or like some of the ones I'll be like, I'll stay here no matter what, I want to fight it. And clients who I'm like, you have a great case. This case should set the law right. I can get the proper decision, make it, and they're like, I can't do this. I'm not sitting in a jail. Yeah. The last case that I won, it was a presidential case. The last presidential case I won in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which was on a criminal issue and whether or not it made somebody mandatory deportation. But that poor guy sat in jail 4 years before I got, and his original sentence on his criminal case was probation.
Yeah.
But then he sat in immigration custody for 4 years while we took the case out and ultimately won it.
What was the one you mentioned before, the individual who's been here for 44 years had an American, like, what were the grounds to detain him? Like, what happened? Like just procedurally, like, how did they get to that point?
Well, so I mean, procedurally, he went. So when you file an application, so he filed his green card application.
Was he here like on an overstayed visa?
Yeah, he overstayed his visa.
Okay.
Basically kind of came to the United States. He's Russian and came to the United States at the time that basically the Soviet Union was collapsing. So there's a lot of people, in that did that, and, his wife's now a U.S. citizen. His kids are U.S. citizens. I told you about the one with the hockey contract. But, you file an application for your permanent residency. And again, as always has been, they fingerprint you, photograph you. So they're doing facial scans, they're doing fingerprint scans. That's a part of your process. And they decided to arrest him when he showed up.
And that's so he's the one who initiated the process and came in and said, I want to try to apply for my visa the right way now. Yep. And they're like, oh, thank you for you. We're gonna put you over here for a couple years.
That's what happens when these decisions are based on quotas and not on real substantive facts. We know that ICE, at the direction of Stephen Miller, who is a deputy chief of staff to President Trump, has mandated that ICE arrest at least 3,000 people a week. So, if I'm a case officer, one easy way to start making my quota each week is just, they're going to come in for an interview or they're going to come in and get their fingerprints. I'll just go grab them there.
Now, I had a case. The client pled guilty to a few. Basically, he got arrested on a criminal charge. Mm-hmm. They issued an ICE detainer. Yeah. We all thought, and so does the immigration attorney, that he's going to get deported. Like, there's no, the only way forward he has is to sit in immigration detention and try to fight for his asylum case, which was going to be very difficult because he had picked up all of these charges. Mm-hmm. So he ultimately he pleads guilty. And then after he pleads guilty, we think he's going to get transferred to ICE because they have the detainer. He pleads guilty. He's released from New Jersey custody. And then somehow they just withdrew the detainer and he was released. Is that did he just win the lottery?
He won the lottery.
Or like is there something that I'm missing here? Like have you seen some similar things happen?
Yeah, I mean, he won the lottery because I will tell you that look, just this week we have a client who I represent in Asylum who is an Uber driver and had a similar car to somebody that shoplifted at Kohl's. Okay, now my client's like, it's not me. I wasn't even there. I have my tracker from my my DoorDash deliveries that I was doing, and Kohl's will have good cameras, right? So we'll be able to see pretty clearly if it was him or not, and he's maintaining it just wasn't him. So while he's in my office telling me that, asking us to represent him on that, ICE texts him. So you need to come to the office on Sunday, this Sunday. And he's like, what does this mean? I said, it means that they saw that you got arrested and they're going to arrest you. They're going to lock you up on Sunday.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, that's always, these are tough situations, look, I am, my core of my business is these complicated criminal immigration type scenarios,
right?
And that's what I do. I have an academic interest in it. I have a legal interest in it. It's just what I do. That said, I understand any American or any administration's desire to want to deport people who are convicted of certain offenses, right? But we just keep adding to that list. And the last time I talked to you, I explained about the Lake and Riley Act, which now it's not even you have to be successfully convicted if you're even charged with something. But the net is so past the worst of the worst, right? I follow everybody. ICE every day is releasing this fugitive who molested and raped this girl or murdered, blah blah blah. I don't always trust those because I personally have represented clients who made it to the ICE worst of the worst page who had no convictions.
Yeah.
And who are like, to me, can I sue them? Like, this is defamatory. And I'm like, good luck. I don't think so. So, and certainly, do not get me wrong, because I've been doing this for 20 years. Plenty of non-citizens, do engage in criminal activity. And, certainly when things are relating to violence and drugs, there's going to be an immigration consequence to that. And I think most people agree with that. What I don't think people agree with is, ICE dressed up like a paramilitary force, going door to door or going through Target.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Cause again, I don't follow the stories certainly not as closely as you do. And between work, kids, and everything else, I don't know exactly what's happening on the ground. Like in Minnesota, for example, like what is the undisputed, day to day there as far as like ICE tactics to implement their mission there? Like what are they doing specifically in Minnesota to enforce their deportation mission?
So this goes to very much a larger and very important question and something that we have to talk about, right? So what's happening on the ground is really outside of the scope of their function and their training. Now, and certainly in some cases, two things can be simultaneously true, right? You and I could go through from a criminal perspective everything that happened with the Good shooting, the woman that died, and her activities that led up to it, which were obstruction, yes. However,
we will talk about that in a minute. I do want to.
But I mean, you also were a prosecutor and know police tactics. That officer is not convictable from my perspective legally.
I agree. Like, I guess let's talk about that second because just get that out of the way. Sure. That is one thing I did take the time and watch the videos from just sort of a criminal defense perspective. And I mean, my first question watching all the different videos was like, what was she doing to begin with? And it seemed to me, and it sounds like this is accurate is that she was there to kind of block them from going forward,
Absolutely.
like
Yeah,
in their
no,
car, like so.
her and her wife were tracking ICE,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of groups doing this across the country, and and she was using her vehicle to prevent them from going where they wanted to.
right. So it's like, okay, like so clearly you can be detained for obstructing their movements. Who knows? I don't know what she was doing before that, right? And then I watched the other videos, including the body camera from the officer that fired, and it's like, yeah, like I don't look. At the end of the day, I don't think she was trying to run the guy over.
Right.
But in that half a second where you're like sitting in the shoes of the guy in front of the car, you can argue all day whether he should have pulled the trigger or not. But if we're talking about whether he's criminally liable and you can prove it, there's no way. There is no way you could prove that self-defense didn't apply in that situation.
Yeah.
In that split second.
Yeah, of course not. And the you and I are going to look at things with the attorney hat on.
Yeah.
The bottom line is that she was there to obstruct. Do I think she was trying to hurt that officer? No. Do I think it was bad police tactic on his part to position himself in front of the vehicle?
Yeah,
Yes.
probably.
But
Yeah.
she went heavy on the gas. And this is why I always say to my clients, I know it's tough. I know you're scared. But let's de-escalate situations. Let's be calm and cooperate. Because if you're going to try to agitate and obstruct to this extent that we see going around on, particularly in Minnesota, but all across the country. And guess what? ICE has got plans for Philly next week, so we're going to see a lot here locally. Bad things can happen. Okay. Yeah. But two things can be true at the same time. I don't think that woman was trying to hurt him, but I do think he's legally justified in what he did. The other issue, though, that requires some investigation beyond these videos, which is very problematic to me, is that there was a citizen who was a medical doctor on scene, and they wouldn't let him render aid, and she bled out for about 8 minutes by some of the reports I heard before.
Yeah, I haven't.
Before a paramedic arrives, and that to me crosses the line. If you felt there was a threat and the threat was neutralized at that point, right. Let's try to save this human being's life, whether we agree politically or not. It's still a human being. But just now back to the larger issue here is that you cannot. The problem is that.
And the larger issue for those watching was we were talking about what exactly different tactics being used, right. Like objectively being used in Minnesota.
Right, and so I'm gonna keep going through a few of them because it's really important. So, the courts are going to have to speak on this and say that every physical human being in this country is protected by the Fourth Amendment, or they're not, because what came out last night is that there was an internal memo by acting ICE Director Lyons directing ICE agents to forcibly enter people's homes when necessary without a judicially signed warrant. That is a big problem for me in terms of somebody's home, and because most of the time, if they're looking for, say, somebody who has a deportation order, maybe no criminal order at all, to bust into their home, they might have three U.S. citizens living with them.
Yeah.
Their constitutional rights will be clearly violated if ICE agents kick down their door as citizens because they're looking for somebody who has an old deportation order or may not be documented in this country. So that's one of the things in the home. And so you have groups like ACLU and others telling people, no, don't open your door unless you see a warrant, not an agency signed warrant, because ICE will write their own warrants up, but a judicially signed warrant that is in compliance with Fourth Amendment protections. Until or unless you get that, don't open your door. Well, people are doing that, but they're getting their doors kicked in. Right? So that's one problem. Now we have to talk about street encounters. All right. So, we've seen cases now of U.S. citizens being detained by ICE. These are verified cases. ICE has no authority to detain a U.S. citizen. And so now I'm not talking about citizens who are throwing stuff at them. I'm not talking about citizens who are using their car to block them. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about just in general to pull you over and check your papers and detain you because you're brown. Yeah. that's just, or you're speaking Spanish. People from Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens. They're brown and they speak Spanish. So, we're seeing, because of lack of training, lack of proper mission focus, the net is being cast too wide. It's very, very sloppy, and I expect it's going to get very, very ugly until or unless, and they may never do it, until or unless the courts rein this in a little bit. Now, flip side, if I am an undocumented person,
About that for a second. I mean, like, what, from a procedural standpoint, how do the courts rein it in, right? So
they say that the Fourth Amendment is going to apply in every context. You can't carve out some agency interpretation that says we can do whatever we want in violation of the Fourth Amendment.
That would have to come from an
courts first. Yeah, of course.
Controversy, right? So it would have to be someone bringing a civil. I mean, in that either going through. Well, I guess like backing up.
You can't challenge that. Listen, every day attorneys say, "Look, ICE, my client, they've smashed open his car window, they drug him out. The arrest was unlawful," and the judge said, "What do you want me to do about it?" That there is no forum.
That's what I was about to say. Is like
right. you have to come
if ICE kicks your door down, and like let's say there's 2 illegal immigrants inside, 2 U.S. citizens inside, if they go in there and they detain the non-U.S. citizens,
which they would. As procedure, right. They would handcuff them. They would,
even if a judge finds that they kicked the door down unlawfully and they entered the home unlawfully, it doesn't undo the detention of those 2 illegal immigrants, right? Like they're still going to go through the immigration process. Yes. That doesn't help them, right?
Correct.
So then the other side is, all right, there's 2 U.S. citizens in there. They're obviously ultimately not going to be, detained by ICE. They're going to be like set on their way. Their only recourse in the situation is to file a lawsuit against the United States government. And like, even if they win, which would take years probably, even if they win, that judgment doesn't prevent the government from doing the same thing in the future, right?
No, it doesn't. But if there are enough cases and a big enough class, and the courts really hammer on, in edicts say, Fourth Amendment must be respected, proper search and seizure laws must be applied regardless of the context. Because, I for years say immigration civil, right? It's a civil thing. But no, the everybody that wants to deport everybody is pointing at me saying, no, it's criminal. Even if you don't have any crimes, you're just coming into the country, or it's criminal. Well, you know what? You can't have it both ways. So if you're going to say this is all criminal, then we need to give people the protections we give them in the context of criminal court. So I do think with the Supreme Court at least explicitly stating that Fourth Amendment needs to apply and significant monetary damages, no, it won't stop somebody who's snatched illegally from, or somebody who doesn't have legal status from going through the deportation process. It might curb the behavior and protocol, which is not being followed, which just creates a more dangerous situation from my perspective. I think certainly there's an argument that, criminals, terrorists, deport them, vet people, close the border down, things that have happened, sure, right? I want a safe community. I want a safe country. But this is chaos, snatching kids, 5-year-olds at school, the things that, going into schools to snatch people, taking people who are being in hospitals, being treated for cancer. This will not have a good societal effect, and it doesn't make us safer. And the only way to, and I'm not, I have plenty of colleagues that want a total abolishment of Homeland Security and a reconfiguration. I'm not even on that camp. I'm just saying is we have to have some policies that reflect the United States Constitution and our values and what is truly necessary for security. Because somebody who stole perfume 25 years ago isn't likely to jack you, okay? But all this chaos on the streets with protesters and destruction and ICE going hot and heavy into people's homes at 5 o'clock in the morning. Bad things are happening. They're going to continue to happen.
That's for me, forget about the political argument. Forget about even immigration arguments here. Like, there's a cost benefit to everything. So if you going in there to enforce immigration the way that they're doing it in Minnesota, like forget about like whether they should or shouldn't do it. Like there is innate cost to that, which is the people protesting, right? People resisting the process and resisting the tactics that are being used. And so, and I think in part that led to the death of Miss Good. And then you can argue, like, should she have been there? Should she have been blocking them? Surely, like, that was not a good idea. Surely it wasn't. But I watched the videos. Could the ICE officers have handled that situation differently before the shooting happened? Like, I mean, I have this all the time in criminal defense where, I have a resisting arrest case, and it's like, like, did he resist arrest? Like, sure he did. Could we maybe have like handled that better and it wouldn't have ended that way? It wouldn't have gotten to that point? Yeah, like I think so. I mean, I think I watched your video. Like they very quickly they scared her, right? Like she got scared.
Yeah.
She got scared, and you can criticize her.
I want to say something about that though,
Yeah,
because this is my problem, and it's my problem with Republicans. It's my problem with Democrats. She is not going to move her car, but when you have Democrat officials constantly calling ICE and the president Nazis, 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 Nazis. Well, of course, when the Gestapo takes a step toward her car, she's going to freak out, and it is immature on the part of our elected leaders, and it's totally irresponsible. Flip side, though, obviously, I'm saying Republicans do that too in their own way.
well, they
But
call it, the immediate response to her was she's a domestic terrorist,
exactly,
which is just like, come on,
protesting.
come on.
Obstruction is a
Yeah.
problem, but protest is a constitutional right. And so we're not going to quick immediately jump to, because then you have the right wing people saying she's a domestic terrorist who deserved to get shot in the face.
He's got the goddamn soundbite politics of like, oh, let's find what's the best 2-word phrase that we can put up there to to just label like the whole thing, like, right, like oh, like how do we look, she was doing something ill-advised, she was protesting, she was being obstruction, she was committing obstruction, no doubt. She got scared, she hit the gas, the officer got scared, rightfully so, fired the gun. Like, can we just sit there and say this is a tragedy that like could have been avoided by her and by ICE, like if they had just handled it a little calmer?
Well, look, I mean, to your point, and you're exactly right. Like, again, we're living in a country right now where people can't wrap their minds around, or at least it seems that they can't wrap their minds around two things being true at the same time. And that
Right.
they have to have a side, and whatever their team wants, they have to agree with it in toto in every situation. And that's not real world. And that's not how, at least you and I, as trained as attorneys, are trained to look at things. And unfortunately, and I watch, because, like you said, I got the kids too, and I got well, just like you, but this is my world, so I have to stay.
Right. You got up on that.
I watch videos from conservative outlets that show protesters acting a certain way. It's despicable. But I also see plenty of videos from the protesting side where I see people very calmly exercising their right. And I'm like, wow, this ICE agent is completely escalating this situation. Like he's the one stepping towards, he's the one being like, I'll knock you out. I mean, so to your point is, if you're professional officers of this government, you have to be professional. And I tell you, and you've seen it, I saw a video last week where a local police officer, this person was deplorable, to saying disgusting things to this guy. Cop was cool as a cucumber, did his job, effectuated the arrest. And I'm saying, man, if somebody talked to me like that, I'd want to punch him in the face. But we do require that level of professionalism from our officers. They shouldn't be hurt in any way, and they should be able to defend themselves when the situation calls for it. But to get this rabbit ears thing where somebody called you a fascist pig, so now you got to go marching towards them and maybe blow them with your pepper spray, be better than that. Be better than that.
Yeah, and usually when you are cool and collected like that in those scenarios, from a law enforcement perspective, it normally doesn't end in violence.
Correct.
Right. It just, because, and if it does, you did nothing wrong as an officer. Like, you did everything you could to de-escalate the situation. And sometimes you have to do what you got to do as an officer, like in a dangerous situation. But in this case here with Miss Good, like they could have done it in a way that wouldn't have run the risk of frightening her. And we're saying her, I mean, it could have been anyone, like any activist who was sitting in the car doing what she was doing. Again, shouldn't have been blocking the road. But like in the atmosphere we live in right now, if officers conduct themselves in a certain way, it could cause a reaction like that. And here we are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and you know, and again, it's like when I come back to the Fourth Amendment, like, you know, this again, these groups of ICE agents walking through Target and Home Depot, or just going house to house, questioning people dressed up in paramilitary gear. I mean, that's not a vision I want for, and it's not necessary. There wasn't this extreme riot that needed to be shut down. So that is over policing, which we have learned with data that community policing is the safest way for safe communities. As I speak to you from where I sit in the city of Camden, that has seriously reduced crime rates here because they've taken a community policing approach. And this whole notion of us against them, and now potentially we're going to, do things like make our local and state law enforcement engage and arrest ICE agents. Nothing but disaster can come of that. To me, that is the complete wrong response. I mean, there was a bill like that on Governor Murphy's desk. He had 3 immigration bills that he signed in the last hour. 2 that he declined, he pocket vetoed, 1 that he signed. And I'm glad he didn't sign the 2 other ones because, it just posits us more like we're going to be like in a civil war footing where it's, state and local authorities against the feds. I mean, there are husband, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers on both sides. Like, give me a break. We're not doing this. Like, but everybody wants to score the political point,
yeah.
and it's a disaster.
I will say on that point, and I didn't even realize this until I looked it up like a few weeks ago. I didn't realize that some states don't even honor ICE detainers on people who are in local jails.
Yes.
Like New Jersey does, and I've always been used to that, which just seems like common sense. Like if hey, like we're really gonna let someone go as a ICE detainer that's in a jail?
Listen, I don't like when my clients who are charged, sometimes wrongfully charged, or it's a very minor offense, go into ICE custody. But I will say, and I'll say this in support of Tom Holman, the head of ICE, he's been saying, and he's absolutely right, the safest place for everybody to transfer somebody that they want is in a jail. It's the safest way. Hand them to ICE in the Camden County Jail and let that process play out. But this kind of roving sweeps through, first of all, even if nobody's hurt, I'm running around like you. I'm running around with 3 kids, 12 and under. I don't want to be a target. Like, what, now I'm going to be here 3 hours because there's some, ICE operation going on. I'm just trying to buy a few things here and be on my way.
Is it fair to say, like, a lot of the rhetoric from, the supporters of ICE doing what they're doing is that, we're only going after people with criminal record or criminal charges. I mean, it doesn't seem like that's the only target at this point.
Well, your statement is accurate, although the mantra of ICE and the administration and their echo chamber is they're going after terrorists and the worst of the worst. They're going after terrorists and the worst of the worst. And the net is cast so far beyond that. And again, so it's wrong for people to hold that mantra.
Is it that, like, hey, just go out to the Home Depot today, just see what you find? Or is it like, Joe Smith is an illegal immigrant from this country. We think maybe he's at the Home Depot today. Maybe he works there. Go to the Home Depot and talk to everyone you see. And if we find anyone else who's here illegally, like, detain them too. I mean, is that how it's going? Or is it just like...
So as a way to kind of, and again, this is strategic because to what we had talked about, not every state honoring detainers is that what ISIS said in response is, fine, we might be coming looking for, Joe Schmo, but anybody we encounter while doing
Yeah.
that who's undocumented is getting locked up too.
Right.
So, or undocumented or overstayed their visa, or even people in process who are literally one step away from getting their green card. It's a joke, and it's a waste of our tax dollars. Like the gentleman I keep referring, because it's a good example. We're gonna get him his green card. Okay, he's going to get a green card. He's 100% eligible for it. So you're just really just damaging this guy, costing him his job, stressing his family, using our taxpayer dollars to house him for however many months it takes for a judge to just finally give him a green card.
Derek, this is something else I was going to ask you is, there are it's like there are like single cases that sort of like catch the attention of the country and become like sort of like the poster child of what's happening. Like, you had, the Abrego Garcia case, like it's all this publicity and there's all this stuff going on with that. We won't even get into the facts. That's a whole nother video. And it, like Renee Good, all these but like, it seems like, as tragic as Renee Good was, I don't think it's a great like poster child for people who are in opposition to what ICE is doing, because she was wrong in her own way that day.
Yeah.
So like, why is it that there aren't more? It just seems like there are so many other like individual cases that could be poster child.
Yeah, no, I mean, look,
happening.
you make a great point, and I will briefly talk about Abrego Garcia and Khalil. Like, I mean, I am not a pro-Palestine activist. I actually generally am supportive of Israel, right? So they're going to take a guy who is an immigrant, who is a Palestinian activist, disrupting a college campus and putting Jewish students, making them feel very uncomfortable. Well, if you're on the deportation side of things, it's like, yeah, I'm not sympathetic for this guy. We let him come here to study. We gave him a green card, and he's out vandalizing one of the oldest universities in the country and scaring its students, right? And he graduated. He wasn't even in school still. So bad poster child. My side, not my political side, but my professional side, trying to describe Abrego Garcia is just a Maryland dad every chance they got. Well, there's more to his history than that. And so, and that's easily discoverable, which it was. And so again, these are like, so for the people that are more pro-immigrant, he's not a good poster child either.
Right. It just, and I don't get it. Like, it seems like there are people out there who you're like, the day-to-day American would look at the case and be like, wow, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? Like, why are we treating this person like this? Like, it's not deserved. But they're not in the news. We don't hear about those cases on an individual basis. And it's all hearts and minds, whether you're on one side or the other. Like, if there's going to be a change to the different policies that are being implemented now, the only way that's going to happen is if the people don't like what is happening, and we can't, that's not going to happen unless we talk about the cases where they are clearly objectively shouldn't be treated the way they're being treated.
Yeah.
And when they're not the poster child for the argument, and you have all these other ones that we just mentioned being the poster child, where there's like a clear, like, oppositional position that you can't just dismiss out of hand, that's where I'm at a loss with this whole topic. Like, I don't get why we're not seeing more, that perspective, like.
No, I hear, look, you don't see me go into the media because I got a client who's been nothing but a little gangbanger since he got to the United States, carjacking people, and he's detained. And I'm not out there saying, "Hey, can we get some sympathy for my client because he's only 19 years old." He took the opportunity, his parents, to bring him here to just be a little punk gangbanger. I mean, and so there are cases like that, and it's just that because this has just become so subjective and politicized, I don't think most people even know what the objective facts and truths are. And obviously, it's certainly okay to have a system of immigration. But I purposely started this chat off by saying how legal immigration has been undercut severely, and that was in response to everybody who keeps out there saying, well, I love immigration. I just love legal immigration. It's going to be legal immigration. Well, you're attacking that too. So the point is, you just don't want immigration. And I don't think that I do think shutting down the border because again, as I also in fairness talked about, the undocumented population likely doubling under Biden's
Right.
short tenure. I think the closing down of the border and securing it was probably an 80-20 issue in terms of
Yeah,
people
I mean, like,
supporting the president. And
I,
and most Americans, I think it's an 80-20 issue.
right.
But how what this is going to look like, this kind of like, targeted, and when I say target, I mean targeted, like a regionally targeted, like Operation Midway in Chicago, and now there's all these, and Minneapolis and all the places that they're going. Some of this is going to be really hard to watch. you know, Media is going to go sensational, right? Because truthfully, I want, it's going to be the person whose window gets smashed in and drug out of a car that makes the news. We're already seeing that. So, but why is that person not getting out of the car? So it falls right back into, what team are you on? What team are you on?
Yeah,
Instead of the person whose only infraction was that they came here and overstayed a visa and they're now eligible for their green card, and they peaceably comply with their arrest. Nobody's going to show video of that on TikTok.
yeah.
So,
It's not sensational enough, but that's the type of case where I think most Americans would sit and say, why are we detaining that person? Right?
yeah.
Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
Well, Derek, it was getting late. It was good talking to you.
You too.
Thanks for coming back on. We probably do 20 more of these and still have more to talk about. Till next time.
All right, brother. It's good talking to you. Good luck with the
You,
podcast.
you too. You
All
too.
right.